Let's start with a story. It's a story that, on the surface, seems to be about love, but it ends with a very real threat of violence. So, what happens when the lines between affection and obsession completely blur? Okay, so picture this. There's a 55-year-old man. We'll call him Mr. X. He lives a pretty quiet, isolated life with his mother. His main hangout is the local coffee house. He mostly just sits there, watches people, and keeps to himself. But inside his own head, it's a completely different story. He believes he's the star of this epic romance. He is absolutely convinced that a woman who also goes to that coffee shop is madly in love with him, and that she's sending him all these secret signals that only he can pick up on. And here's where this romance takes a really dark turn. It all comes crashing down when he gets arrested for threatening that same woman with a knife. But get this, it's not because she rejected him. It's because he's now convinced she's a witch who put a love spell on him, and he desperately wants her to take it off. So, what on earth was actually going on here? Was it a secret love affair that went wrong? Some sort of crime of passion? No, the truth is way, way more complicated, and it's all rooted in this incredibly rare and dangerous psychological condition. To really get a handle on Mr. X's story, we first have to understand the condition that was pulling the strings: erotomania. So, this is erotomania, sometimes called Clérambault syndrome. And let's be super clear. This isn't about having a crush on someone from afar. This is the unshakable, 100% delusional belief that someone else, often someone famous or of a higher social status, is secretly, deeply, and passionately in love with you. And this is where the logic gets, well, completely twisted. The person with erotomania believes the other person started it all. They made the first move. And every time they're rejected, their brain just flips it. A no is secretly a yes. Getting a restraining order? That's just a test of their devotion. This paradoxical thinking, as it's called, is what makes the delusion so powerful and so hard to break. And this delusion tends to follow a really predictable and, frankly, dangerous path. It all kicks off with hope. You know, this period of just waiting for the other person to finally go public with their love. But of course, that never happens. So hope curdles into resentment and humiliation. And from there, it can fester into a full-blown grudge, where that love delusion flips into a delusion of persecution. And that is exactly how a knife ends up in our store. Now, clinically speaking, it's not a one-size-fits-all thing. There's what's called the pure or primary form. That's where the delusion is pretty much the only thing wrong. It hits suddenly and tends to fixate on one person for a long, long time. Then you have the secondary form, which pops up alongside other issues like schizophrenia. In those cases, the object of their affection can actually change over time. It's a really important distinction, so keep that in mind. Okay, so with that framework in place, let's get back to Mr. X. How does his real-life story stack up against this psychological blueprint? I mean, this timeline shows a pretty terrifying progression. At 51, he fixates on a married woman, Mrs. A. But when she confronts him, the delusion doesn't break, it just shifts. He decides the coffee shop owner, Mrs. B, must also be in love with him, and that she sabotaged his first affair out of jealousy. Fast forward a few years, and it shifts again to a third woman, Mrs. C. And that's when things go from stalking to this persecutory delusion about witchcraft and finally to violence. And this quote, this gets right to the heart of it. When Mrs. C turned him down at her job, he didn't register it as a rejection at all. He saw it as proof. In his mind, the only reason she'd say no was because she was too embarrassed to admit her true feelings in front of her colleagues. That's that paradoxical thinking we were just talking about, right there in action. But, you know, real life is rarely that clean. As doctors took a closer look, they realized Mr. X's case wasn't so straightforward. He didn't really fit neatly into any one category. And this is exactly where things got so tricky for them. If you look at this chart, you can see Mr. X checks off a lot of the boxes for pure erotomania. He believed the women loved him first, that they were of a higher status, and he had an explanation for all their rejections. But look at these last two items. His target changed. It wasn't fixed on one person. And the delusion wasn't chronic. It was recurrent, coming and going. That just doesn't fit the classic profile, which created a real diagnostic puzzle. So he was a total paradox. His personality, timid, withdrawn, not a lot of experience with relationships, very attached to his mother, all that perfectly matched the fixed type, the kind who latches onto one person and never lets go. But his behavior, cycling through different women, that was classic recurrent type. He was a hybrid of two different profiles. So you might be wondering, okay, a diagnostic puzzle. Why does that matter so much? Well, getting this right isn't just some academic exercise. The stakes can be incredibly high. Here's a really interesting and frankly pretty sobering statistic. While more women actually experience erotomania, it's men who are way more likely to wind up in the legal system because of it. Their delusions are much more often connected to dangerous, violent, or illegal behavior. And in fact, research has pinpointed some specific risk factors for violence in these cases. Being male is one, coming from a low socioeconomic status is another, and, here's the big one for this case, having multiple objects of love, hopping from one person to the next, is a third. Mr. X had 3 of these major risk factors, which makes identifying this condition early so important. And that brings us to the really difficult part, treatment. It's incredibly challenging. Medication can sometimes help manage the symptoms, but for a lot of these patients, the only thing that actually breaks the cycle is forced physical separation. We're talking hospitalization or legal action like a restraining order. And that's why so many of these cases, just like Mr. X's, only come to light after a crime has already been committed. The story of Mr. X is just a really stark reminder that a delusion isn't just some quirky belief. It's a powerful, all-consuming alternate reality for the person who's living it. And it leaves all of us with a really critical question. How can we get better at recognizing and responding to the dangers that might be hiding just beneath the surface of a mind that is absolutely convinced it's loved?